We need to take the view of Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine, raised as a son by Ben Franklin. Thomas Paine decides there is no God. Okay, what does Ben Franklin say? How dare you? How dare you go, not that you disagree with God. He never once said, how dare you say there is no God? You must believe there is a God. He said, how dare you, being raised in this society of religious people and seeing the good that has come from religious people who stopped slavery. Was it a group of atheists? No. They were Christians.
Welcome, everyone, to Deist Reality. Christians stopped slavery. Really, Glenn? One look at those who voted the slavery clause out of the original draft of the Declaration of Independence will give a clear example of how fast the Christian faith collectively tried to stop slavery. The Bible was indeed used to justify the practice. The KKK, although an extreme example, shows the kinds of people Christianity breeds. Christianity, it could be easily argued, started the slave trade in America. For any Christian to take sole credit for stopping slavery may make them feel good, but like their faith, it's simply not true. Glenn talks of Thomas Paine not believing in God, making him some kind of an atheist in his own mind. But is there any Christian writing on slavery that can compare with Thomas Paine's writing against it? I think not. I find it very hard to believe it's pure ignorance on Glenn's part with Thomas Paine's religious convictions. I find it hard to believe as well that between himself and his staff who claim to care so much about the facts of history, they can be so blatantly ignorant on matters of Thomas Paine. Is their Judeo-Christian faith so important that they'd lie in order for the world to embrace it as some kind of a truth? For me, it seems this way. For several years now, Glenn has brought up this letter of Franklin to Paine. Benjamin Franklin never said, how dare you say there is no God, because Franklin knew Thomas Paine had a deep love for the creator of all. They shared the same religious conviction of deism. Mr. Franklin told Thomas Paine, you will not succeed so as to change the general sentiments of mankind on that subject, and the consequences of printing this piece will be a great deal of odium drawn upon yourself, mischief to you, and no benefit to others. You might easily display your excellent talents of reasoning upon a less hazardous subject, and thereby obtain a rank with our most distinguished authors. I would advise you, therefore, not to attempt unchaining the tiger, but to burn this piece before it is seen by any other person, whereby you will save yourself a great deal of mortification by the enemies it may raise against you, and perhaps a good deal of regret and repentance. If man is so wicked with religion, what would they be without it? Benjamin Franklin was right on with what the Christians would do to Thomas Paine, but one can only wonder if Franklin really read this most important pamphlet. I say this because the Age of Reason was all about religion and God. Glenn Beck's wrongful insinuation that Thomas Paine tried to eliminate God with this pamphlet shows that Mr. Beck may not have read the Age of Reason as well, and takes only Franklin and Samuel Adams' word that it was against God and religion. Where freedom is, said Benjamin Franklin, there is my country. Where freedom is not, replied his friend Paine, there is mine. These sentiments, if true, seem to show the difference between the two men that this letter in many ways confirms. Mr. Beck most likely never even read the title page, for if he did, he'd see that it reads, The Age of Reason, being an investigation of true and fabulous theologies. In this letter of Franklin's, what do you think he meant when he said to Paine, think how great a portion of mankind consists of weak and ignorant men and women. Franklin, being a pure deist, and like some self-professed deists of the day, thought Christianity, any Abrahamic faith or religion, was at least a good tool to keep mankind somewhat under control. The Age of Reason was an investigation of true and fabulous theologies, so not only did Mr. Paine show the fabulous, nonsensical aspects of all the Abrahamic faiths in this most important book, he shows us a path of understanding the infinite that no rational mind can possibly deny. These Christian types throughout history can't argue the logic found in the Age of Reason. The Christian arguments or books against the Age of Reason are all forgotten, and the Age of Reason to this day is an awesome tool that helps many break free from faulty theologies or absurd religions. The Christians' only option was to discredit the author, and since Thomas Paine's life lived easily compares to any prophet they praise, they have to make up things, as Glenn Beck seems to be doing, to downplay Thomas Paine's true worth for all of mankind and the life that surrounds us. The Age of Reason, again, is an investigation into true and fabulous theologies, and says nothing about Thomas Paine not believing in God. All of his writings, both political as well as theological, clearly show his deep love and passion for this force that makes all things possible. Franklin was right about Thomas Paine. He was treated with widespread hatred and disgust that continues to this day by Christians. People like Glenn Beck and a host of other Christians, like days of old, have been continually molesting Thomas Paine's memory to the point where he is almost forgotten by mainstream America. Franklin said he'd lose his rightful rank with the other distinguished authors, and he was right. When you understand the true worth of this world hero called Thomas Paine, his writings, life lived, his moral character that again easily exceeds any prophet the Christian can invent, you can't help but to feel some contempt for this faith that claims it's all about love. How did Franklin know Mr. Paine would be unchaining the Christian tiger with this pamphlet? How did he know a great deal of odium would be drawn upon Mr. Paine? Franklin said, "You will save yourself a great deal of mortification by the enemies it may raise against you, and perhaps a good deal of regret and repentance." What do you think Franklin's letter here is asserting about the Christian faith? Thomas Paine never repented, of course, for writing this awesome pamphlet. To the end of his days, he held strong with his convictions. How did Franklin know all this would happen if Thomas Paine published The Age of Reason? He knew it because this is consistent with how many Christians treat others who attempt to rationally investigate the Christian claims, as Thomas Paine did. This letter from Franklin is the only negative tool the Christian can find on Thomas Paine, and they use it as often as they can. They don't realize that this letter casts them in a very bad light rather than Thomas Paine. It casts Benjamin Franklin in a bad light as well. Franklin's letter, like Samuel Adams, only proves they probably never read The Age of Reason in the first place, or they certainly didn't read it in full. We could say the same thing about Mr. Beck, David Barton, Peter Lilbeck, and all other Christians who called Thomas Paine an atheist, an infidel, a pagan, demonic, and all kinds of other words that go along with those who speak out against the fabulous assertions the Christian faith forcibly imposes upon society like some kind of a truth. Franklin's own biography states that he was a pure deist like Thomas Paine was. Thomas Paine was well aware of the difficulties that attain this subject as well, but despite what Franklin warned and what Thomas Paine knew for himself about the Christian wrath that would surely come down upon him, Paine had the fortitude to publish the truths anyway, showing great courage on Mr. Paine's part and exposing the dark and evil side of this faith called Christianity. It really is impossible to calculate the moral mischief that mental lying has produced on this society because of Christianity and people like Glenn Beck who push his story. Mr. Paine needed to unleash the Christian tiger, this mind-numbing theocracy that plagues the world and keeps us from the true path of understanding needed to be called out. When Paine died, these vengeful, demagogue, Trinitarian, original sinning people who teach us to subdue the creation, to take dominion over it, and that our Creator overshadowed a young virgin girl who was engaged to be married, slandered and desecrated Thomas Paine's character. Lies upon lies they told their weak and ignorant, as Franklin called them in his letter to Paine, till Thomas Paine was almost forgotten. He told the truth about the Bible. This was his sin. Most reasonable scholars for many years now agree wholeheartedly with Thomas Paine's assertion about the Bible, but for some reason the Christian can't forgive him for being one of the very first to speak out against all Abrahamic ignorance that keeps mankind from true progress. Thomas Paine opened the door for others to speak out against false claims on matters of God, and takes the Christian wrath upon himself for the rest of us. In a time when it was socially unacceptable to speak out against what Franklin asserts in his letter as a vengeful theocracy. Thomas Paine didn't hate the Bible. He disliked the wrongful interpretation of ancient linguistics that clouded the minds of the people. Not only did Thomas Paine expose the Bible for its true nature, he showed the world the only true religion, theology, or path of understanding the infinite that's in complete harmony with science and reason. Once again, I've said this many times in my videos, and not one fatheist has yet to challenge me on this claim. Why? Because the simplistic truths found in deism are self-evident to all those who use reason as their guide. Thomas Paine's sin was showing us a direct path of understanding the creator of all that requires no middlemen. This angers all Abrahamic faiths. The Age of Reason was all about a providential, theistical God, making Glenn Beck's video about Mr. Paine seem like deliberate lies when you realize Mr. Beck writes books about Thomas Paine, and one would assume at the very least he read his works. Franklin said, "But were you to succeed, do you imagine any good would be done by it?" Thomas Paine's Age of Reason has done much good, and we've yet to see its true worth. To this day, no Christian has refuted the truths found within. We should have a right to investigate the absurd claims by people who manipulate ancient linguistics to fit their outrageous claims, especially when they're constantly being pushed in our faces like some kind of a truth, as Christianity has always done. Thomas Paine said, "It is the duty incumbent on every true deist that he vindicate the moral justice of God against the calamities of the Bible." Your faith, Mr. Beck, your misunderstanding of ancient linguistics breeds atheism and spiritual as well as social segregation. Thomas Paine in the Age of Reason was trying to show the world's people that life is the sacred text from God, not interpretations of ancient linguistics that none of us at this great distance in time can know anything about, ultimately taking man's authority over God's. Mr. Beck, you're consistent with your Christian counterparts of old in your treatment of Thomas Paine. You should at least read the title page or the first few pages before showing your complete ignorance for all to see. It reads, "To my fellow citizens of the United States of America, I put the following work under your protection. It contains my opinion upon religion. You will do me the justice to remember that I have always strenuously supported the right of every man to his own opinion, however different that opinion might be to mine. He who denies to another this right makes a slave of himself to his present opinion, because he precludes himself the right of changing it." You Christians handled Thomas Paine in the exact same way Franklin said you would, showing the world a mean, vengeful, petty side that's always laying just below the surface of Christianity. You say it's all about love, but your actions collectively have always shown a dark side to this thing that you call a religion. Thomas Paine goes on to say, "I believe in one God and no more, and I hope for happiness beyond this life. I believe in the equality of man, and I believe the religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy. My own mind is my own church." Then he says this, "I don't mean by this declaration to condone those who believe otherwise. They have the same right to their belief as I have to mine. But it is necessary to the happiness of man that he be mentally faithful to himself. Infidelity does not consist in believing or in disbelieving. It consists in professing to believe what he does not believe." Franklin's letter to Thomas Paine, if critically, honestly analyzed, clearly shows the moral corruption Christianity has always imposed upon society.
When Thomas Paine wrote about his disbelief in God, Franklin felt compelled to write him and in giving him a scathing critique. That was like father and son. Here's part of it. He said, he wrote to his adopted son, if you will, Thomas Paine, "I would advise you not to attempt unchaining the tiger, but to burn this piece before it is seen by any other person, whereby you'll save yourself a great deal of mortification by the enemies it may raise against you, and perhaps a good deal of regret and repentance. If men are so wicked with religion, what would they be without it?" Samuel Adams wrote the same thing. He wrote, "When I heard you had turned your mind into a defense of infidelity, I felt myself astonished and grieved that you had attempted such a measure so injurious to the feelings and repugnant to the true interest of so great part of the citizens of the United States." Here's what he's saying. How dare you? You have actually grown up and you have benefited from a society that has Judeo-Christian values. You don't have to go to church. You don't have to like church. You don't even have to like God. But to condemn God and try to say to the rest of society, that's nonsense. How dare you? The only reason why we exist is because of God. I feel like I have to shake the shoulders of some of my friends and look them in the eye and say, without the Torah, without the people of Judah, you have no law. Ours doesn't exist. Our country doesn't exist. Nothing exists. You get rid of the Torah. You get rid of the Bible. Nothing works anymore.
Those who care about Mr. Beck should show him his mistakes in regards to this matter. Mr. Beck should take another look at those who feed him information. I don't understand how they could miss the obvious on this matter, unless, of course, it's all deliberate. Mr. Beck, once more, The Age of Reason is an investigation of true and fabulous theologies. Just because you don't agree with Mr. Paine's very accurate assertion doesn't give you or any Christian the right to desecrate his sacred fire. If you and your organization are really about truth and God, then you owe the world an apology for the many years of slander and disrespect you all continue to impose on this world hero called Thomas Paine. That's all I have to say for now. God bless. Over and out.